Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of FI Live, coming to you live into your laptops, mobile phones. Technology is wonderful, isn't it? So happy to be here. I am Susan Choi, FI Digital Media Director, your faithful host of the show. And I am so excited to have with us today. We've got some really great guests. We're going to be talking about the plant-based sector, but we'll get more into that in a bit. First, I want to remind everyone that foodinstitute.com is your premier source for all things food and beverage news, podcasts, webinars, of course, excellently researched written content, special events, and live streams like this are all brought to you by www.foodinstitute.com. Don't forget to check out that website. You can find out how to become a subscriber, maybe how to become a sponsor. We always could use more of those. And most importantly, to check out all the great content that we have. So www.foodinstitute.com for all of your food and beverage industry needs. And please, most of all, very important, if you are liking what we're doing right now on the live stream, do not forget to like, comment, share. That really helps us. That helps us grow. That helps us put ourselves out there in the social media atmosphere. So please check out more stuff that we have on our YouTube channel, in our LinkedIn page, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We are there. Again, engagement is key. Like, comment, share, subscribe to our channels. All right, we're going to get into it right now. Yes, the plant-based world is what we're diving into today, and not just the plant-based world, but plant-based seafood, and not just plant-based seafood, but plant-based shrimp, if you can believe it. Many companies out there are trying their hand actually at plant-based seafood, but mostly have been going into going into salmon and tuna. But we have a company here that's getting into plant-based shrimp, and we're really excited to hear their story, hear their thoughts. Let's hear the stats and numbers, where this might go. So I'm going to bring in the major players first. I have my faithful co-pilot here, Senior Content Manager of the Food Institute, Chris Campbell. Thank you so much. We're going to have a good time, right?
I'm so excited to be back here live again on FI Live. It's been a couple of weeks since I was able to join, but yeah, I just want to reiterate some of those points you made. Plant-based has seen some headwinds this year, but I think we're seeing something of an opportunity with plant-based seafood generally, and I think plant-based shrimp specifically. So it'll be really interesting to kind of take a look at what New Wave Foods is doing and kind of take a look at the market at the same time.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was great. All right, we're going to bring in the woman of the hour right now. She is the CEO and co-founder of New Wave Foods. She was a CPG engineer at L'Oreal, so she has got the experience and knowledge to back herself up. She was a featured person on Forbes 30 Under 30 food and drink list members to watch in 2021. She is Michelle Wolf of New Wave Foods. Thank you for joining us, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm so excited to chat with you about all things plant-based shrimp today.
Yes, got to get into it. But last but not least, we got to bring in a very honored guest as well. He is a Food Institute Live veteran. He is a food industry expert, decades of experience, and he also happens to be a board member of New Wave Foods. Taylor Crown, a board member of New Wave Foods. Thank you for joining us, Taylor. Happy to have you on again for a second time.
Yeah, no, very thrilled to be here, Susan and Chris, and I'm glad to be talking about New Wave and plant-based shrimp with you all and Michelle today. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, Michelle, tell us, what is New Wave Foods?
So New Wave Foods is a company with a mission to reduce the strain that we've put on our seafood supply chains over the decades by offering a quite tasty, delicious, versatile, you can use it in any way possible, plant-based shrimp. So we've been working really hard over the past few years to get that taste, texture, and deliciousness factor so that we could deliver on all the promises of a plant-based offering.
And I want to ask a question real quick, Michelle, and kind of start and frame this conversation is why shrimp specifically? There's a bunch of different types of seafood that you could have focused on. What drew you to shrimp specifically in the product development process?
Absolutely. So shrimp is the most consumed seafood, not only in the United States, but also globally. It's consumed so much, it's by a factor of 2 more than the next most consumed seafood. So it's a huge market opportunity. But also, as I mentioned, we have a very mission-focused business where we wanted to like I said, alleviate the pressures on our seafood supply chain. So whenever we looked at the issues happening in shrimp, I like to say it's the poster child for things that can go wrong, if you will. Shrimp is actually number 3 in terms of greenhouse gas impact, in terms of animal agriculture after beef and chicken, and all those things that you hear about microplastics, antibiotics, and pesticides that are used in farmed seafood. You see those same things happening within the shrimp industry as well, unfortunately.
And I think that opens up an interesting conversation about sustainably sourced, environmentally friendly. We see this with animal and seafood kind of aquaculture, I guess you could call it, fishing. A lot of people turn towards these different types of attributes when they're going into a specific product, right? Sustainably sourced. In your new wave foods context, is that something that you kind of take a look at? Do you classify yourself as sustainably sourced? Is that something that you put in your marketing, or is this something kind of separate since it's being generated, not really caught? How do you kind of place yourself in that entire sustainability kind of matrix there?
Yeah, I think we see ourselves in I think general conversation of plant-based being more sustainable options compared to animal agriculture. But I also see this as we're a yes and in that conversation. The problems that we're seeing in our, that are impacting climate change and our world right now need many solutions because these are big problems, and we see ourselves as one of those solutions as well.
Michelle, I'm really curious to ask. So, in our own research, we definitely found some interesting stats to what you were saying. I mean, we put it up right here. The NOAA saying, more than 25% of the total amount of seafood Americans consume was shrimp. So, I mean, I think that the average burger can think of, probably the last few dishes that had shrimp in it. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, it's such a versatile seafood, and like things like shrimp cocktail, right, and like sizzling shrimp in a skillet. Those are kind of like treats that people enjoy consuming, like when they go to a restaurant and stuff. But especially in the plant-based sphere, I was talking about this with Rachel Dreskin, who is the head of the Plant-Based Foods Association. There's a lot of demands for, those companies that consumers have now. Like they want it to taste good, they want it to feel like the real thing, but it has to be plant-based, it has to be good for the environment and all that stuff. And we've seen dozens of companies now coming out with plant-based seafood, but very few are actually doing shrimp, probably because it seems very challenging to try to recreate that texture. So what, Michelle, what led you to, trying such a challenging, item like shrimp? Like, what was your motivation for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit it right on the head that getting the texture right is the biggest thing. And I think it was something where we wanted to go big or go home, if you will. So we wanted to go after the biggest one, the one causing, the most issues, if you will. And it was really important for us. And I think one of the reasons why you don't see many other companies going after shrimp is because that texture is so unique. It's very different from a fin fish and obviously the meat that you will find on land. So we haven't been able to rely on some of the other plant-based technologies that you have seen going into some of the other plant-based products. We really had to start from scratch to get that, succulent bite, that little bit of a snap that shrimp have, and then also make sure it was going to be versatile and stand up to all of these cooking preparations that you can do with shrimp, from frying to baking to boiling. We wanted to make sure it worked across applications, not only for consumers, but our food service operators as well.
I think that could be an interesting thing to talk about here too, is with the R&D process. I know that you have two different types of shrimp. You have, I guess, an unbreaded is probably the best way to call it, and then a breaded version. Is that fair to say with the two different varieties there?
Yes, exactly. And then some proliferation within those two categories.
So can you talk to us a little bit about the R&D process? What was it like trying to develop these two different types of products? I know they're similar, but I'm assuming they have some differences in between them. Was it, co-developed at the same time? Were they developed in succession? How did that kind of work out?
Yeah, so we focused on we call it the naked shrimp, the unbreaded shrimp first, to get that taste and texture correct in a place where we wanted it. I think, I'm going to talk about texture a lot, but getting that specific texture was going to be so important for us. So we focused on that first. And then the flavor was actually pretty challenging because we had some difficulties defining, well, what do shrimp taste like? And having this nuanced taste of this fresh ocean flavor, but the shelliness that, shellfish have. So getting things that could recreate that, especially with natural ingredients, was also a challenge for us. But then putting it together and making it not only something that tasted like a shrimp, but also something that was important to us was, okay, I don't want to just have one of these and say, yeah, it tastes like shrimp. Something that you can stick your hand in and keep eating it. And that's where the breaded started to come in as something that I think 30% of the shrimp market is breaded. So we went after breaded as a natural line extension for something, for people who say, I don't know about this plant-based thing, I'm not sure. Having something breaded and fried is an easy gateway for them to try this out and then maybe lead into something like our naked shrimp to try later on as well.
I think I want to come back to customer trial at some point, but before we jump over to that part, I do want to talk a little bit more about the ingredients as well. So sorry if I missed it here, but I know in the pre-call we talked about mung beans being one of the main ingredients, and I was hoping that we can talk a little bit about, some of the motivations that brought you to that. Was it just flavor? Was it health? What kind of, rationale did you have when you decided as mung bean being one of the major ingredients?
Sure, absolutely. So I think just to step back for a second to talk to how we got to mung bean, in focusing on the texture, we used a seaweed derived ingredient that was able to get us that, snap, that bite, that chew that we really wanted. And then we needed to start building in the protein content. And I would say every week there's a new plant-based protein coming out. And so we screened them, and the things that we focused on were, first is the flavor. The most difficult thing for an R&D facility like ours is to remove that flavor from a plant protein. So anything that had a beany taste or an off flavor, we really ruled out because it was going to be incredibly hard for us to mask that later, especially in something that has such a fresh taste like a shrimp. We also needed a protein that would be synergistic with the matrix that we had. So mung bean has a slight gelling property, at least the ones that we use, and that contributes to the meaty texture overall of the product. And then I would say the third and final thing up there with flavor is color. Shrimp are white, off-white in color as the base. So anything that was starting to venture into beige or brown, we really had to stay away from. So mung bean really fit all of those categories of being able to provide that protein content, but then also meet those flavor attributes that we needed to have in the product as well.
I love hearing you describe, the process. I mean, obviously you're putting a lot of effort and thought, as you should, to something like plant-based shrimp, where you're, really trying to recreate, right, the texture and the feel. And I do have to say, I was able to try a bit myself. Thank you for the samples that you sent us. And one thing, that I definitely saw was the texture. The texture it had that spongy, that springy texture that, I am familiar with mung bean as a product, my ethnic background being Korean, and we use mung beans a lot in our food. And I thought it was that's a really, great, like thinking outside the box, way of like what kind of alternative protein can you use to recreate the texture of the shrimp. Taylor, we got to get you into this conversation. I want to hear, what's your story? How did you, learn about New Wave? What made you decide to jump on the New Wave train?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Susan. So, I've been on the board since earlier this year, right? And when I was first approached and first presented with the opportunity of, is this something that I want to get involved with? There was a number of things that I brought to that decision process that I already knew about, right? I knew, as Michelle indicated, that shrimp within seafood is a very significant market, right? As Michelle said, it's the number one seafood by far. I think it's around 5 pounds per capita in the US, which is very significant, right? So that's number one thing for me was, is this going to be a very big market? Yes, it is, right? It's also a market that is heavily eaten as a percentage of the times that us as Americans eat shrimp are eaten away from home or in food service occasions, which aligns to both my expertise and interest, and also kind of how I think about this category, right? So that's number one. I also knew, independent of this discussion, that shrimp, ocean-based shrimp, comes with a significant amount of challenges and problems, right? So it's both in terms of the greenhouse gas and sustainability that Michelle has already touched on. it has health challenges, right? It's a significant source of cholesterol for humans. It has human rights and other sorts of challenges like that. So I was aware of that. And to be clear, I'm not an activist, right? I'm a member of the board and other things in my daily life. So primarily, I'm concerned with the commercial aspect. Like, is there a market for this? Can this company capitalize on that and scale the opportunity? And by the way, along the way, help customers, whether it's food service end users of all varieties, as well as retail and really every segment, kind of succeed in this place in a way that can help them to meet new consumers. So I never think that kind of what I would call a protest vote is a sufficient and fully baked reason to eat something, right? Like, it's part of it, that what we bring, depending on our demographic and kind of what we bring to the table, but it's not enough, right? Maybe enough for trial, but it's not enough to consume multiple times. So both when I also, like you, Susan, got samples at home, as well as more significantly that I'd like to mention, my first kind of outing officially with New Wave is at the National Restaurant Show. And our partners at Alohi, the culinary team there, had built out 2 recipes that I'm gonna mention. One was a shrimp taco with the unbreaded, kind of a mini shrimp taco like you would see at a Velvet Taco or a Torchy's or one of these places, and then also a boom boom shrimp using the breaded and fried product that was mixed with kind of a savory hot sauce. And frankly, I found both of them absolutely delicious and craveable. And I didn't think they were good for plant-based, right? Which is sometimes how we talk about it. I thought they were good and delicious and craveable on their own, and what I would consider to be really kind of everyday food, right? Stuff, food that I would go out with friends and family, after golf, after a ball game or whatever it is, and eat with a beer or a glass of wine or whatever. So this to me is a really compelling thing, right? Really big market with challenges that need to be solved, and a product that is delicious and craveable and applicable to many different, menu applications, whether it's in food service or other eating occasions as well. So this is, to me, really felt like a unique and kind of special opportunity. In addition to, obviously, the founder and kind of Michelle's story, which you've indicated, significant and really important investors that have been behind this company since the beginning, as well as mentions in publications like Fast Company. I mean, it's really kind of a neat and unique story, even in its nascency in a way.
Yeah, I think maybe we could take a little time to talk about trial, since you kind of brought that up, Taylor. And, when I look at the current kind of plant-based trend, I know that vegetarian products have been around for a while, but I think we really started to see some movement when the Impossible Whopper came out. And all of a sudden, Americans across the country, even across the globe, really were able to get their hands on a product that was plant-based and made for them. Right. I think in America, a lot of people are concerned about making plant-based products because they're not sure how to do it. And I think they have the same problem with seafood. So I'm wondering, from your vantage point with your food service background, taking a look at, this plant-based shrimp product, do you think it checks both of those boxes? And, kind of maybe tell me a little bit about your rationale there with the, trial aspect when it comes to food service.
Yeah, no, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Chris, right? Like, I think it is a challenging thing to recreate this at the individual operator level. And I'm reminded, I live in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and there's a vegan soul food restaurant that's fantastic in Ballantyne, if anybody listening is from the Charlotte area. And they create a number of things from scratch, including like plant-based crab cakes and chicken and all sorts of things. And it's incredible. Shrimp is uniquely challenging, I think, for the reasons that we already mentioned. And again, I keep hitting on, Chris, that commercial aspect. It's both challenging and a big market. So I like both of those from a commercial and scalability aspect. But I think fundamentally, I see this as the 2 menu applications that I mentioned at the restaurant show, and I think we can extrapolate from there. I don't think this is necessarily a shrimp cocktail application. Like that wouldn't be the first thing that I would go to. But in terms of any sort of hot application, multiple, ethnic cuisines, et cetera, I think it lends itself extremely well. And for all the reasons I think we've already mentioned, is just craveable, and it is something that you'd want to eat again. So I could see it from certainly progressive operators within food service across all really across all segments, right? So I think we saw recently, as last week, that Aramark announced that 44%, I think the number is, of their 250 plus college and universities would, no, I'm sorry, 44% of the menu offerings on their 250 college and universities would be plant-based by 2025. I saw anecdotally Burger King in the UK opening a vegan-only operation. Like, I always kind of think, simply put, like, they know things we don't know, right? Like, they know this is, or they know things that we have hunches about as consumers, which is that this is an area that a lot of people are interested in, and need a solution that's going to be able to provide that at either the local operator, like I mentioned, up the street, or at the scale of the two that I just mentioned.
Michelle and Taylor, what about, we're talking about the food service strategies that you guys have that you're prioritizing right now. What about, inevitably, if and when you want to get into the retail space? Have you guys anticipated what your steps would be in that area?
Sure. So I'll take it and maybe give some hints over to Taylor, but I'm actually remiss to have not talked about food service yet at all on this episode, because the majority of shrimp, up to 70 to 80%, and seafood at large, is eaten outside of the home. And this is ocean seafood for a variety of reasons. Is eaten outside the home for a variety of reasons. So what we have focused on is the food service market, and that's why we joined forces with someone like Taylor on the board, because he had that experience and could kind of guide us through this quite complex channel. Actually, it's very much data limited, especially compared to retail. But it is something where we wanted to go, if you don't mind the pun, we wanted to fish where the fish are and go where the market already is in terms of ocean shrimp, and offer the plant-based shrimp offering there. We are thinking about retail and planning for a launch in late 2023. But one of the things we're seeing is people are tending to purchase more and more plant-based products in retail. So although the shrimp market and seafood market might not be as heavily centered in retail, there is a market for plant-based options in retail that we want to take advantage of as well.
I could maybe slightly add to that as well, if that's okay.
Yes,
whereas a lot of my expertise, background, and passion is in food service. And by the way, who shares that with me? Everybody, because everybody loves restaurants and eating out. I mean, it's such a part of really the fabric of our lives, right? I mean, that's what I love most about it. But a lot of the work that I've done, both in consulting currently, as well as the organizations that I've been prior to 2022, have been in food service and retail, and really omni-channel approaches. So that, even though that's, I call it like my major and my minor, right? Like, food service is always my primary interest, but I really think about everywhere that we go to eat meal occasions as consumers, right? So I think an interesting just tidbit to build on what Michelle said is, we know that, as I mentioned before, seafood is the protein that is primarily eaten as a percentage. We eat it mostly away from home, right? So this really showed up during COVID, where we really, at least for a period of time, couldn't leave our homes, where the sales of seafood at retail skyrocketed, right? So that's kind of an interesting, like, I knew that this was true, but as we saw these data come in, and being at the time part of again, omni-channel, all food outlets organization, that data really supported that. So I think certainly the retail application is going to be an important thing for this category and New Age specifically in the future. And I think my hypothesis around why it would be true that most of our meal occasions, or many of our meal occasions, are in food service, I think is twofold. One is because seafood inherently, I think, is an experiential thing, right? I mean, Susan, you mentioned at the beginning, right? The sizzle of the shrimp in the skillet when it comes out from the kitchen, and that crunch of the fried shrimp that we get at a fried shrimp place, et cetera, is very experiential. But I think also as consumers or as home cooks, we're a little bit afraid of seafood relative to other proteins in terms of how to prepare it. So I think part of that is going to be making products that are applicable for air fryers and toaster ovens and different type of applications like that, but still have that great eatability that we're going to expect from something like this.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, when when I tried out my little sample, I popped the Cajun breaded shrimp in the toaster oven. I think it was like for about 10 minutes, like 450, and it came out fine. It was like heating up my son's chicken tenders. So that made it a lot less intimidating, that process of cooking a shrimp. But Michelle, I wanted to ask, I was interested in about the mung beans, sourcing, how you source your mung beans, and also if you might have encountered any supply chain issues. I was made familiar with the fact that you can find mung beans domestically, but they are also, because it's mostly an East Asian product, Southeast Asian product, you mostly get them from there. Where do you get your mung beans? And also, like, how do you anticipate, or how have you, if they've come up, dealt with, supply chain issues because we are still, within, a labor issue, supply chain issue, in this time, speaking, B2B wise.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, the prominence of mung bean and East Asian cuisine and Korean cuisine makes that supply chain challenge a little bit less intimidating for us, because while mung beans are new to us here in the West, they've obviously been eaten for centuries over in Asia. So we actually haven't had too many, I would say, unique supply chain challenges. I mean, everyone over the last year has had, I think, their own bouts of supply chain challenges. The most prominent one would be just increases in lead times. So we just have to be a little bit more careful about the kind of planning that we do in terms of sourcing, different ingredients. Where we've actually seen had more of a supply chain issue is actually with our sunflower oil. If you can believe it, the national flour of Ukraine is sunflower. So with the conflict going on over there, we actually had a little bit more of an issue than compared to mung bean getting that for a little bit, but that's all been resolved. We're good to go. But like I said, I would say things specific and unique to mung bean, not really, but I think across the board, everyone's having issues with increased costs and lead time, and are just having to be a little bit more thoughtful about how their supply chain planning is happening over the next 12 to 24 months.
Sorry, Chris, one more thing I want to ask. I know Chris he's got a lot of great questions to ask. I just want to ask one more for you, Michelle. It just came to me. Again, it's like, love the thinking outside the box, coming up with, mung bean as alternative protein. What would be, I guess, maybe like a good piece of advice you could share to, our audience? It's we're a B2B company, so a lot of our audience members are going to be, restaurateurs and small business owner entrepreneurs like yourself. What would be a good piece of advice to share with, other aspiring, plant-based seafood or, alternative, sourced, product startup, wannabes or owners, they want to think outside the box. They want to be creative and find like an alternative source, and not just the usual variety of alternative sources. From your experience, like, what would you say would be like a good piece of guidance that you could give to people who are they're still in that conceptual process?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think always keeping taste at the forefront, and this is advice that every plant-based company is going to tell you, is to not lose sight of that, but also don't lose sight of the fact, yes, it has to taste good, but I think there's something where I've had some plant-based products where I'm like, yeah, this tastes like the animal counterpart, but I don't want to have another one. And it's almost like it's too close, or I almost think there's this uncanny valley of plant-based meat where it's close, but not close enough. So figuring out how to get that craveability, and I think that's what we've done really well with our breaded shrimp, is getting something that is, evokes the taste of shrimp, but then it's something that you want to sit down at the bar, like Taylor said, have a beer and eat a bunch of Cajun shrimp with a great ramelade or something as a part of your meal. So I would say taste, and then for other entrepreneurs, I would say don't be afraid of the unexplored or the unique. So when we were developing our product, mung bean didn't really have much prominence. There were some, I think some of the egg replacements were just starting to talk about it, but it wasn't something that was widespread like pea protein. I got, advice all the time about like, why aren't you using pea protein? Have you tried it out? And I'm like, every single one I tried, I was like, it's too beany, it's too brown, it's not going to work. I get the supply chain is more mature, it's not going to work on our product. So we really had to, take a risk on something that wasn't as widespread, especially United States wasn't as familiar with, but was going to deliver on what we needed from a taste and texture standpoint. So I think that's my advice is, I think all entrepreneurs are, in general, not afraid of the unknown, but that applies to how you're thinking about your products as well.
Yeah, I love that comment about the uncanny valley. I haven't heard it like placed that way, but I think it's a really good way to kind of explain what a lot of these plant-based products are like. And I think we're starting to see that a little bit with some of the results at retail. We're seeing a little bit of a slowing. A lot of people are not sure what's going on in the plant-based space right now. I think that's a fair way to say it. You have some people that say it's just a blip on the radar. You have some people that are saying, hey, this is the downturn we've all been looking for after not catastrophic, but a very, very quick rise at the beginning of the pandemic. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, when you take a look at all of these headwinds, what is your audience reaction that you're looking for with the different people that you got buying your products? Are you looking for vegans, vegetarians? Are you looking for flexitarians? I mean, for seafood, you even have pescatarians. So you have another wrinkle in this that a plant-based company doesn't have to deal with. So I'm just wondering, when you take a look at the consumer, what kind of solution are you trying to provide to them? What kind of consumer are you trying to reach? How would you say you're, kind of outreaching to those consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are really focused on that flexitarian, the climatarian consumer who's really interested in reducing their carbon footprint in the way we eat. So that's always going to be our target, is that is the largest opportunity, if you will. But also not forgetting, our true champions, the vegan and vegetarian market as well in that. But I think as you talk about headwinds too, and I'm calling it the plant-based panic, if you will, right now. But finding that there are headwinds that are facing the entire food industry right now, and especially food service. One is inflation, which is impacting even all of us on this call right now. There's also labor shortages, and we're finding that the restaurants that are finding labor, the skill level has dropped as well. So what that means for us is that we have to be really thoughtful about, not innovation in the sense of, oh, we need to come up with all these new products, but we need to innovate in the sense that how do we make these easier to use, like in a toaster oven? How do we make sure these work in an air fryer? The turbo chefs that are used in a lot of smaller restaurant operators as well. And then I think the third factor that we're seeing right now is we talked about the supply chain issues already. That's still happening within, not just ingredients, but even with other distributors in the country as well. So those three things are all impacting our food service operators right now, and things that we need to be mindful of, and especially how we develop our growth strategies. So there's a lot of focus on how this is impacting specifically the plant-based industry, because quite frankly, there's a lot of stakeholders who want it to fail. And so any sort of downturn, they want to jump on that, create the catchy headlines, and perpetuate this idea that plant-based is just a fad. I would tell you it's not, and I would tell you we should not confuse hindsight for foresight. I think people are looking back at things that have happened and trying to explain the current moment, but I don't think those things are going to explain the future. And I think, there's also, we have to learn from the past and learn from those playbooks and how we're going to adjust to the world we're in now. But I don't think that what's happening right now is necessarily a predictor of the future, especially if you have, more and more entrepreneurs entering the space who are going to continue to develop better and better products, new technologies, and further this thing, because the demand for plant-based products and more sustainable products, that hasn't changed. But I think there are other factors that are just plaguing a newer industry like the plant-based opportunity that, everybody's working on to overcome.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michelle. That's a good transition for how I want to pick Taylor's brain. Taylor, you are an industry veteran, decades of experience. You've seen trends come and go. You've seen, economic downturns, upturns. I'm sure, how it's affected the food industry. What's your take on, all of the salient points that Michelle made, the challenges facing all of food industry, as well as, what she feels, her company, as well as other plant-based companies, need to do to really push people out of that thinking of, oh, plant-based is just a fad, and also just encouraging people to try new things, because I'm sure, as you could share with us, that's probably tending to be like a behavioral thing amongst the masses, hesitation to try something new. Tell us your thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, a few thoughts. I think Michelle said it exceptionally well. Not that much to add necessarily to the points. I do want to maybe highlight the flexitarian as being the kind of the primary consumer that I see, and I think it's in the name, right? Like the flex part of that, which is we kind of go as consumers, broadly speaking, kind of go in and out of how we think about what we want to consume. Certainly in kind of the journey of our lives, but even sometimes the journey of a week, right? So I think this is really an important point. But I also personally don't find it all that interesting, again, just for me to sort of pontificate or have that many thoughts on like plant-based is this overarching sort of thing. Generally speaking, I think for all the reasons Michelle has indicated and that we've discussed already, I think it's absolutely something that is building. I mentioned the Aramark and the Burger King sample. We could go on and on. But when I think about our industry specifically, meaning food service, right? I've tried to walk the fine line a little bit of being really kind of interested in food everywhere that we consume, which is how most of my career has been. But specific to food service, it is, Susan, a place and a channel where trial of new and unique things often happens, right? I always kind of say that food service is most of our, as Americans, kind of gateway into being global citizens, because we try all sorts of different foods and cuisines and people of different backgrounds than ourselves and so forth. And this is really kind of a magical thing. Shrimp is part of most of them, right? So this is really a good way to be able to do that. But fundamentally, I think within this food service industry, and I say this a lot, kind of in my daily business interactions, is all of us on this call, but specifically those of us like Michelle and I, kind of who day to day deal with selling and marketing food products into the food service channel. I believe that we're in service to the operator customer, whether it's commercial, non-commercial, large chain, local independents, and everything in between, and to help them to find solutions for their most pressing problems, right? Like that's our purpose as sales and marketing professionals within this space. And for all the reasons that we already indicated, we know that it's challenging to do this, and yet a great opportunity to provide, as Michelle, I think, said, an and, not an instead of, right? Is to say, hey, can we provide with breaded applications, with unbreaded applications, really delicious, craveable. We've now said that like 10 times, but it's maybe the biggest takeaway I think from this call would be that craveability. Overall, this has got to be food that you want to eat over and over again. That's why we go out to restaurants at least multiple visits, right? So to me, this is really the key to the whole thing, which is we serve the flexitarians, and including in that vegans and vegetarians for sure, of course. And as we move in and out of that kind of in our lives, but also we serve that operator to help them to provide these solutions in ways that helps them to offer really delicious and craveable foods that fits into their niche and their way of seeing the world, which is, I would argue, there almost is no industry that I'm aware of that's as creative as addressing those challenges as our industry. And we're going to help them to do that with this really important protein. That's how I see it.
Oh, there's so many things we could follow up on there, Taylor. I love the whole idea of the global citizenship coming from the food service aspect. And I think shrimp's in a unique spot because it is, like we said earlier, kind of present across so many different types of cuisine. Just think off the top of your head, you have shrimp tacos, shrimp scampi, right? Fried shrimp. So, the list goes on and on. So I love to kind of explore that. But what I'd like to jump into right now, and this is kind of a plug for a podcast I have coming up, but I talked with Prime Roots. They create a plant-based deli solution. And one of the things they really brought up was that experiential aspect. I know we've talked about that, a little bit, but I'm wondering, Michelle, from your part with the R&D, how much, does that come into the play? Is it just creating the solution, but also making sure that it gets that sizzle and everything? I'm wondering, in the R&D process, is that at the top of the list, bottom of the list? How does that work out?
Yeah, it's right there with getting the right taste and texture. So again, we really focus on food service, so we understand what those constraints are within a commercial kitchen, and also, you know, the level of expertise in some of our core targets. So as we are developing products, we're mindful of, okay, how is this going to be used? How is it going to be stored? What happens if it's left out before it's put into the freezer? So some of that testing is really important. You know, not only just getting something that tastes good, but that is also robust. It was really interesting at the National Restaurant Association show. We listened to a panel of operators, and a lot of them said, hey, I get the plant-based thing. I understand that it can bring in more customers, but if I have to mess with it too much, then I'm really not interested in it. And that's also, I think, up there with price as well. If it is out of a reasonable price range, operators aren't going to be interested, no matter how much you can sell them on the taste, the you know, widening their demographic of consumers as well. So having that versatility built into the product, I would say, is just as important as the taste as well.
And another thing I got from that podcast that seems to line up with what New Wave is doing is they really have this new focus. They originally branded themselves for vegetarians and vegans, and depending on, you know, what your source is, you're looking at approximately 5% of the US population. I know that kind of goes up and down depending on what, you know, stat you're looking at, but they made this rebrand over to the flexitarian because of a lot of the reasons that you said, right? Taking a look at, you know, wanting to make sure that you're not isolating those consumers. And personally, I think vegetarians will probably be pretty loyal to a product like this. You don't need to necessarily reach out to them directly, but that flexitarian consumer. But one of the things that you brought up was the climatarian consumer. And I think that's really interesting. Over the last couple of years, we've definitely seen some rising interest in ESG principles overall, but we've seen certain food service operators actually putting carbon, you know, output or carbon, you know, labeling on some of their products. And I think we can move over to Taylor at this point. Just with your background and in the food service industry, are you seeing a rising interest in this across food service for providing a solution that is, you know, carbon neutral or even carbon offset or even just lower carbon in general?
Yeah, well, you know, look, I think in other food channels, i.e., let's just call it grocery and club and kind of non-food service, we have a tendency to be much more comfortable with talking about consumers, right? In food service, being a three-tier model through distribution and so forth, we historically have had a tendency to be more comfortable talking about end users or operators and customers, and rightfully so for the reasons I think I just articulated. But I think we increasingly gain awareness of the really obvious statement, which is consumers are the customers of the end users that we serve and the operators that we serve, right? So as the consumers are changing, what they're interested in eating, how they're interested in sourcing that food, the ESG and kind of broad, not just halo, but also kind of story and background and impact on climate and really the future, let's call it, right? We know that they're interested in these things, right? And they're increasingly interested in these things. And yes, they align to, you know, largely to sort of generational, although not entirely, right? But at least largely. And by the way, huge generations, right? So it's not like small generations. So as those folks are growing up, becoming consumers, this is one of the first things on their mind. This is not something they learned about as adults. This is something they grew up in. So it would only stand to reason that as they go out to eat or source meals away from home in every channel, right? In every channel, every place that they go, or every segment rather, and channel, everywhere they go to get meals, that they're going to be concerned with these types of things. So certainly, Chris, I think we've seen that at, like I mentioned, the college and university. We would expect this to be kind of the cutting edge, not just because of the obvious kind of educational standpoint, but because college and university are filled with young people that are interested in these things. But those folks also graduate and go to school or go into the workplace, right? So they're going to want that in the cafeteria at the workplace, as well as when they go out to eat at restaurants and so forth, and then ultimately, of course, buy groceries. So I do think, to your point, this is important to the food service industry and to the retail industry because it is important to consumers. So I do think that's forward-looking, as Michelle said earlier. I think this becomes an increasingly important thing for all of us, the industry, to think about how we help to provide solutions for this. Again, from a frankly commercial lens, right? Because we want to continue to sell more servings to these folks and to meet their needs and their expectations across multiple dimensions.
We have a question from the audience here, if we could put that up here. Christine Zolkowski writes, from a marketing standpoint, how do you communicate the "and, not instead of" message to skeptical consumers/retailers?
That's a really good question. I love that. So I would say, I think there have been a few brands who just straight up came out and said, we're trying to replace XYZ animal agriculture product in the next 50 years. So I think, first of all, not doing that is maybe one of the strategies that we take as well. I mean, I myself consider myself a flexitarian. I try to reduce my animal products, but I am far from perfect at it. So I think that ethos is built into the company as well and how we talk about things. And, you know, our marketing is really focused on just how good the product tastes and how versatile it is. We don't spend a lot of time, you know, attacking an industry that's been very important to our economy and our food supply as well. And as I mentioned before, it's not about just one solution. There are many solutions that we need to the issues that are happening. But I think one cool story that shows the kind of partnerships that we can have in this is one of our manufacturers who breads the product, they also bred a seafood item as well, a traditional seafood item. And the I guess owner of the facility is in general skeptical of the plant-based market, but as I was talking to him more, he was saying, hey, you know, for our specific type of seafood we bred, we keep having to go out further and further from the shore to get the product that we need. And he said, look, I don't know that we're going to be able to bred the seafood that we have in the next decade because of climate change. And it was very striking to me. He said, look, if you're he's like, I don't know how people can't believe in the changes that are happening with climate. He said, if they don't believe in it, they haven't been outside recently. So hearing someone from the industry who's seeing the challenges, he's looking to a company like ours to diversify, but stay in that similar, you know, ethos of seafood and, you know, respecting the sea and doing something for the oceans as well. And I will say the same person ate quite a few of our breaded shrimp as, you know, we were sitting there and producing. So I think that's just a great story of, especially behind the scenes, how these two industries can work together to, you know, create benefit on both sides and also address what's going on in our climate.
Right. Yeah. You know, and from what I'm sorry, Taylor, please go on.
No, that's okay. Sorry. It took me a second to get off mute, but I think the question itself, Christine, is a really important question, right? Because it says from a marketing standpoint. So although we started the call with some highlights around some of the challenges that face the category or the industry in general, I think neither Michelle nor I or the company are activists per se. This is not our point of view. We do want to help to bring more good into the world. I think that's part of the mission and mission base that Michelle mentioned, right? But I for one, have been part of and both a consumer of ocean-based shrimp as well as a seller and marketer of ocean-based shrimp, and have no compunction about that at all. In fact, personally, you know, I have more concerns around the cholesterol aspect, right? But I think from a marketing standpoint, part of how a simple answer to your question is not focusing on really the challenges and focusing on the opportunity, which is to create great, craveable, delicious alternatives. And I just real briefly will say, like, I'm a huge fan of so many restaurants. I know you all on this call as well as I'm sure many in the audience, but I'm going to mention my favorite one, or one of my favorite ones, which is Velvet Taco. If you've ever eaten at Velvet Taco, if you have not, you should, because it's unbelievable food. As soon as you're done with it, you want to go back. It's the definition of craveable. And this product I can see being a Velvet Taco, for example, type of application that's really unique to them and is not replacing, but is rather augmenting. And I'm, again, being a little hypothetical here, although if they're in the call here, call us, right? But it's really like augmenting what they already have to create an alternative that would be great for a flexitarian. It would be great for vegan or vegetarian, but it would be great for anyone that would just like a delicious taco at their restaurant. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Taylor. Yeah, we'll back you up on that plug. Velvet Taco, if you're listening, if you're watching, Taylor Crown is counting on you to contact New Way Foods for possible collaboration. Yeah, no, I love the way the direction is going in terms of, you know, convincing, you know, selling this product right to retailers, food service. from that standpoint. And I do want to bring up there a really great point, Taylor, that you had mentioned on one of our pre-calls. We covered the environmental concerns, we covered the health concerns. Shrimp do have an inordinately large amount of cholesterol, and also human rights concerns. From an ESG standpoint. Taylor, if you can share with us your findings, regarding that.
Yeah, well, choosing, as I mentioned before, not to kind of focus on some of the overall challenges, but just at a high level, I think folks that research these categories and kind of shrimp specifically find not just the environmental and greenhouse gas, cholesterol, the challenges that we have mentioned before, but also human rights globally. Is this product, or shrimp in general, ocean-based shrimp, primarily is a wild-caught product all over the globe, and in many areas has well-documented challenges from a human rights standpoint as well. So it certainly is something that people have on their mind, in addition to all the other things that we've mentioned when they go to make choices about what they want to eat.
We have a question from the audience here, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, but it's for Michelle. And Brian's asking, who are the primary consumer demographic groups that are buying plant-based shrimp products? And he puts a number in here. We got millennials, Gen Z, we can even break it down by gender. So I'm wondering if you can give us a little insight, if you have any information there, basically regarding your consumer base.
Yeah, so we're seeing an interest in adopting plant-based diets, flexitarian diets, increase across generations. It is still very centered on millennials and Gen Z. I just saw something interesting recently that 73% of Gen Zs say that they are more concerned about the environmental impact of their food choices, and 71% of millennials say that they are more concerned about the environmental impact of their food choices. So I guess my millennial counterparts can battle Gen Z on who cares about the climate more over on Twitter, but I think just those stats alone show that the center around more sustainable options and plant-based eating leading into that interest in more sustainable options is very clear. We've also found that 63% of consumers overall are at least open to trying a plant-based product if they know it is more sustainable. So I think the sustainability aspect of all of this is really what's driving interest in plant-based overall, because of the impacts that it can have. And then you will see other people with dietary restrictions as well. The most interesting one being people who have shellfish allergies. So it's been really fun to have people who especially have had a shellfish allergy develop later in life, where they've had shrimp before but haven't been able to have it for a while. And some people have just been so excited about the product because they're like, oh my gosh, this is the closest thing. I had a reaction years ago. I can't believe that a product like this exists. Another interesting one is the kosher market. Shrimp or from the ocean are not kosher. It's almost an oxymoron now to say that we have a kosher shrimp available to folks who keep that diet as well. So there are some other, smaller kind of niche demographics on top of the generational influences who are interested in the plant-based products as well.
It's funny, anecdotally, I have a good friend of mine who is allergic to eggs and shellfish. He has been trying out some of the plant-based egg products, and he's going nuts because you can finally eat them, right? So I think, a shrimp product is kind of the same thing. Even if you haven't been able to taste it before, being able to try a product category that you've been restricted from for, in a lot of cases, your entire life has got to be a very interesting and kind of exciting thing too. And probably ties into a lot of the things we talked about earlier about trial at food service and just kind of the experiential aspect. There is a portion of the society that's never been able to even have shrimp, and now you're a solution for them. What does that feel like when you're kind of looking at it through that lens?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting to be an option for people who haven't. I know that there are folks out there who are like, I've never had a product, I've never developed a taste for them. I think that's a very small portion of the population though. But people, again, as kind of Taylor said earlier, this product just tastes good, not just tastes good for a plant-based offering. So I would say to those folks, like, try it out. I know you're not exactly looking for shrimp per se, but it's a tasty option, no matter who you are.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I definitely fit in that camp when I was trying the sample. I gave it a shot and I liked it. So there you go. Definitely want to bring up an interesting stat that we found. Global plant-based fish market projections by 2031, 1.3 billion US dollars by 2031. That is a growth rate of 20%. To give the audience some context, the NOAA reported that the commercial fishing market in the US in 2021 was worth $6.2 billion. So that is a pretty significant number right there. But keeping in mind, keeping that number in mind and keeping in light of what we discussed earlier, Michelle, what you brought up, the challenges, facing everyone right now. We're heading into a recession. We're dealing with inflation. We had a user asking a question, can you guys predict the future? Will a recession negatively or positively impact plant-based sales? Definitely want to hear both of your thoughts, Taylor and Michelle.
Sure. So I wish I could predict the future. I would have solved inflation by now if I could. But what I will say is, I think it will hurt the plant-based industry if you don't know how to respond to it. Whenever we enter inflationary times, people tend towards more comfort food. They eat out less. And on restaurant menus, appetizers and desserts are the first things to go. So keeping those things in mind as we continue to develop and sell in products is meeting those needs of food service operators and consumers in an inflationary environment. If you stay the course on your strategy, pre-recession, then yeah, it's going to probably hurt your sales. But I think it is about how companies react to these times are going to, be the factors that make or break a business.
Yeah, I would add to that slightly, nor can I predict the future, or I would have bet on the Super Bowl, but I like your solving inflation answer as well. But I think, consumers, all of us as consumers can only have two choices, right? We eat food sourced at home or food prepared away from home. That's it, right? So we have some of the shift based on economic times, inflation, recessionary, boom, bust, et cetera. But also within those channels, what are the types of foods and offerings that we're purchasing? We know shift, right? That's both logical, but also the data supports that big time. I would just say within the categories that we're discussing here, certainly lend themselves to a variety of value-based offerings across a number of different segments within food service, within retail, et cetera, right? So there's ways to add a few ounces of plant-based shrimp, whether it's, again, even the taco discussion that I think we've now had quite a bit, right? Is there's a way to do that offers great flavor and all the solutions and craveability that we've talked about, that also meets consumers where they need to be from kind of a value and pricing standpoint over time. So I think in addition to the strategy and all those kind of more 40,000 foot view things, this also just helps customers to solve that problem from a value standpoint.
Basically, Taylor, you're just saying that, Velvet Taco really needs to get on the new wave train here.
I'm pretty sure I've been clear on that. Yeah.
And as a fun fact to close, I will say, I do remember Kylie Jenner answered an audience question once. What is the one thing that you love to eat every day? She eats shrimp tacos every day. She loves it. So there you go. Maybe Kylie, if you're watching New Wave Foods, let's get that partnership going.
I know. The first influencer.
Anyway, Michelle Wolf of New Wave Foods, also Taylor Crown, board member of New Wave Foods, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. This was a great chat. We learned a lot today.
Yeah, thank you both so much. This was really fun.
Yeah, thanks you.
Awesome.
Thank you for having us. Partnership.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much again. So this was Susan Choi of the Food Institute with my faithful co-pilot, Chris Campbell, FI Senior Content Manager, reminding you all to continue to watch FI Live. We will be back here with more great content. As always, please like, comment, and share on this live stream. You can watch it right after this recording ends, forever and ever if you'd like. And please keep clicking on www.foodinstitute.com for all your food industry news needs. All right, signing out. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.